Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hello, I'm Rachel Cook, the Chief Operating Officer at Brandon Hall Group and the host of HCMx Radio podcast. I am excited to be here today and welcome to our podcast. Thank you for listening in or watching us. I would also like to warmly welcome Anjali Kolhatkar, the Senior Learning Architect at DelphianLogic Technologies. Welcome, Anjali. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me here today. I'm good.
Great. And we've been chatting a bit in preparation for our discussion around design thinking and, and our topic today is focused on perfecting human-centered learning design with elements of design thinking. So I'm excited for our listeners today and our audience to learn about your perspective and the some of the great examples that you're working with your clients. And before we begin, I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and your experience and your expertise. If you could share a little bit, that would be great.
Okay, all right. Well, I started my career about 20 years ago. Initially, I started off as an educator and a clinical psychologist. I worked in the field for over 12 years before I moved into the corporate training field. And now over 14 years, it's been more than 14 years that I've been working in the corporate sector. In this field, my experience spans across instructional design, curriculum development, learning consulting. I've also been mentoring junior members of the team. And of course, I love learning, so continuous learning is one of my key focus areas as well. And in this span of about 14 years, I've worked on different projects, hundreds of projects with Fortune 500 companies, government, non-governmental organizations, even social organizations, where we've designed e-learning modules, instructor-led training programs, virtual training programs, videos, large-scale complex design projects as well. So it's been a good journey so far, designing learning for the corporate field. Very recently, what I've been interested in is the human-centered design process. And I'm very keen on implementing this process across projects at DelphianLogic, not only to enhance our learner experience, but also to help them better their performance. So this has been my key focus area of late in DelphianLogic, and the company's been very supportive of our initiatives also.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about instructional design. And most importantly, why, when you're creating or designing a program, why is the audience so important?
To design any effective and relevant training program, it's very critical that we know who our learners are going to be. Because for me, I believe they determine how we should present information and how much. They influence our decisions about content, about learning objectives, about learning strategies that we need to use. They help us to even identify and understand the gap and what the training should address. So if you look at our corporate learners of today, they're not limited to any one age group. We have Generation Y and Generation Z learners who have actually grown up with the internet, grown up with technology, use of multiple devices. And even a sizable percentage of our Generation X learners, they have adopted technology and they have evolved as well. So as far as our learners of today are concerned, the corporate learners, they are modern learners who present distinct characteristics that we need to consider when we design programs. Most of these learners are extremely inquisitive. They usually have very low attention span. They process information very rapidly. they love to embrace technology. They really, it's like a love affair with the mobile devices. So most of them want bite-sized information. They're very output focused. They want just-in-time information. Everything needs to be very relevant to them, and they've rewired themselves to retain only that much that they need also, because they're exposed to so many options of presentation and media, and they are actually becoming very visual as well. So we have to take these aspects of our learners into account when we design effective training programs, because they want programs that really work for them. Otherwise, whatever we design, it's going to kind of, stick out like a sore thumb. So I believe that if we have to design an effective and relevant training program, our audience, our learners have to be in the center of the design.
Absolutely. And you know what I'm finding too, I think we've been talking a lot about the modern learner and thinking about them always being the younger generation or the newer generation in our workforce. But we're finding, I think, just because of what technology has done and how it's shaping the workplace and also in your personal lives, that I think it's all generations to some extent have this expectation of shorter bursts of information, more chunk size bits of information, more creative ways of receiving information. Yes. And so, I think it's changing kind of too the way that we think about, overall, our learner. And let's talk a little bit too about the learner and how do you balance the business objectives or needs to the learning content that you create within this new frame?
Right, this is a good question actually. So when our clients approach us with a requirement, they specify their broad learning goals. They tell us why they need to train their employees. It's their perspective. At that initial phase, actually, there is no research or data which is available on the real needs of our end users. And very often what we see that there is a considerable gap between what business thinks their employee needs versus what the employees actually want. So, on projects where time is not a constraint for us and where there is room for us to be consultative, we usually hold discussions with our client stakeholders and, if possible, with end users as well, in order to determine the learning needs. Because this helps us to use better design practices and come up with more learner centric and user friendly designs. But there's always, and this is a factor of the industry, there is always a trade off, and more often than not, the gap remains. And I think this is where HCD is very useful, human centered design approach. It's like an overarching approach that we can apply, and it has a great value in addressing this gap.
Can you describe what that approach is and how you are using it at DelphianLogic and the elements of human-centered model and bridging that with design thinking?
Okay, all right. Over the years, as instructional designers, we've all used different models and methods to help us in our design process. For example, ADDIE and waterfall being the most prominent. However, what we've realized is that these approaches don't really allow for iterations, and they are non-linear. So flaws or errors in design, they just cannot be corrected. Or even insights or improvements, we cannot actually add them to better our solution. We just can't go back to our drawing board. That's where I believe that the agile practices and design thinking approach becomes inspiring to work with, to create designs that really work very well for our end users. So what we've done at DelphianLogic, we've customized an approach by combining design thinking and agile approaches. What we do is we apply design thinking stages to our solution design phase and agile practices to our development phase. So we have a three-phase process. A solution design phase. In the solution design phase, we involve client stakeholders, our design teams, our development teams. We brainstorm to define the problems, we ideate, and we arrive at the best possible solution. Then we move on to a prototype phase where we actually identify a minimal viable product. which can be prototyped and can be delivered to the client in a 2 to 3 week cycle. And then we develop and deliver different modules in short iterative sprints, in short iterative cycles. So this three-phase process actually allows us to incorporate design thinking practices as well as agile practices very effectively. Uh, should I use an example? Will that help to
Yes,
better understand how this approach is implemented?
that would be great. Yes.
Okay, so very recently, uh, a global client and a global organization was looking as part of their change management program to implement, coincidentally, design thinking as well as agile practices. It was a company-wide project, and they wanted to train different teams and different departments in implementing design thinking and agile practices. So how we set about with this project, this was a requirement. They wanted us to create a robust curriculum, a robust program, along with learning components in order to equip different teams with the knowledge and the skill set as far as these approaches are concerned. So when they approached us with this requirement, how we set off is in our solution design phase, we completely focused on the design thinking approach, which involves a couple of stages like empathy, ideation, defining a problem statement, for example, prototyping, and then trying out the solution. So we actually went through all these phases within our solution design phase, within the broader solution design phase. We started off with empathy. What we did was in this phase, we gathered a lot of information about our end users. Uh, Now, generally, in the typical approaches that we follow, we do an audience analysis. But and here also we do an audience analysis. But the difference over here is we interact directly with the end users. Generally, in typical traditional approaches, what we do is we interact with our stakeholders to understand our audiences. But here, we directly interacted with the end users. We actually had our stakeholder uh, schedule over 40 interviews with end users from different teams, different age groups, different roles, different
You say
departments.
14 or 40?
40, 40.
Okay. Well,
That's a
that's a
huge number.
yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
right.
Mhm.
And we interviewed these employees, these people, and gathered a lot of information about what their roles are, why do they need the training, what is their attitude towards the subject, are they interested in learning, what motivates them to learn, do they have any prior knowledge about the subject matter, do they have any skill sets, what is their preferred mode of learning, what technology they're comfortable with, how much time they're willing to invest in acquiring knowledge, what would their expectations be if they were to take a learning program, and so on. We gathered a lot of information about our learners. And this actually helped us to move on to the design, the next phase in the solution design process, which is a define phase.
Mhm.
After gathering all this information, we came up with problem statements and we developed learner profiles, learner personas. When we developed about 7 learner personas, and for each learner persona, we documented all the learning needs.
Okay.
Once we did this, of course, this was again in collaboration with the client. So basically, this process allows us to interact with our stakeholders right early on in the process and often in the process. And it's not only the stakeholder, but also internal stakeholders, your own design teams, your development teams, members from all teams interact continuously throughout the process, which is a very good thing. We work really collaboratively. So then we
Very
moved on to the
fluid.
design. Sorry. Uh,
Very fluid process.
it's a very dynamic and fluid process, yes.
Mhm.
Uh, and so what we did was we moved on to the next phase where we defined our problem statements, came up with the personas, and then moved on to an ideation stage where we actually brainstormed to generate ideas with the stakeholders, again, internal and external stakeholders, and to arrive at solutions, which is why we were able to come up with actually learning paths for different profiles. For these 7 profiles, we came up with 7 different learning paths based on those learning needs. And we were able to incorporate a variety of learning components to meet those needs. It was not only the online modules or online learning activities like webinars or even forums, discussion forums. But what we gathered, the information that we gathered during our interviews, was that most of them were not only looking at theoretical knowledge, but they were also looking to build their skills. And they wanted practical experience. They actually wanted to interact with their peers, see how their peers are working, what they do to make things work. It was that level of information we got from our learners, which is why we were able to actually create a very good blended program where we incorporated practical activities as well, workshops, which were classroom workshops, as well as work coaching dojos, for example, or even workshops on coaching and facilitation skills, because they were looking to develop their skills as well. We wouldn't have got this information if we had gone the traditional way, actually, because this was direct end user interviews. And when you talk to your end users, you get a lot of understanding about their perspective, about the problems and the pain points that they are facing. So this really helped us a lot, the empathy phase, to actually ideate and come up with the correct solutions, the right solutions for different learning paths. And then we chose one of the learning paths as a minimal viable product, which is when we move to the next phase, which is our prototyping phase. We developed and delivered this in a cycle of 2 to 3 weeks. We Of course, we had to take a lot of feedback in from our clients, incorporate the feedback and finalize it. And then we moved on to our development phase, where we started developing the different solutions for the different learning paths as well. So this becomes a very iterative process where you get feedback from your stakeholders, incorporate the feedback, implement it, and proceed ahead as well. Once that prototype was ready, we actually decided to try out this solution that was ready. So we gave it to the end users and got feedback from them. Again, this was an iterative cycle where we incorporated their feedback to make that solution really workable for the end users. So this was an entire process which we followed on that project, on that particular project.
And Anjali, did you face challenges along the way? It seems to be, I think it sounds like it's very robust, very a lot of moving parts. And though I feel that being able to integrate the needs of the learner at every point in time, at every conjunction, makes it to be very effective. But what kind of challenges, if you faced, did you face?
Yes, there were challenges all along the way. One of the biggest challenge we faced on the project was time constraint. The client, when they agreed to giving us a project, working with DelphianLogic, it was a 10-week commitment, basically. But however, at that time, the client hadn't even realized that the initial empathy phase would last for about a month. 40 interviews were scheduled. Looking into everybody's calendars, getting their time was extremely difficult. So that phase went on for a long time. But fortunately for us, the client stakeholder, being really interested in human-centered design, and he himself was an Agile coach, so he was extremely cooperative, and he understood the importance of spending that much time in the empathy phase to create a very good solution. So he had that kind of confidence and faith, and understood the importance of time we spent on in that phase as well. So that really worked out for us, fortunately.
So
but time definitely was a constraint.
And that's not a surprise. We see that often in any learning program or any project per se, especially with technology. There's always going to be the original time frame, and then kind of the allowed time frame, or the buffer. Well, and I'm sure some of the things that you've learned can be incorporated into the next the next cycle that maybe will perhaps shorten it, but that's kind of to be expected.
Yes, it is. Yes, true. And
And
actually, we also faced another challenge over here. It was the interviewees. Some of them were very guarded. They were not very open about their attitudes or feelings about the subject matter. So, as
okay.
the interviews progressed, I also had to keep refining my questions, rephrasing them to actually get them to express their thoughts and needs and feelings about the subject, because it's all about the end users eventually. It's a design that we are creating for them. So that was also a little challenging for us. We had to make sure that we are asking the right questions and rephrasing them to elicit those kind of responses that will help us create better design.
Sure. And you mentioned that you would not have been able to get to this type of result with using a traditional approach. And so I think and even if you had probably used a traditional approach, it would still exceed probably the expected time frame. And I think it's much better to have a better end result than to have something that meets the actual time frame, but not really kind of the goals in mind, right? So, how did you measure success?
Uh, Well, I believe our first measure of success was that a client who has worked with us for over a decade in a certain way had this confidence to let us change the way we approached the design of this project.
Okay.
So we really appreciated these little wins, like several stakeholders just not coming on board and agreeing to us going
Mhm.
ahead with this design process, but also being very enthusiastic about participating and contributing. But if you really look at it in the end, one of the most tangible measure of success was in the numbers. One of the
Okay.
components of the prototype that was rolled out as part of the pilot, it was a role-based participatory workshop. It was designed to equip our participants with the required skills to conduct effective and result-oriented discussions with team members and thereby manage teams effectively. So this program, this participatory workshop, was an opt-in program for Scrum Masters, for product owners, for even delivery team members. Uh, the opt-in rate for this program has consistently remained 5 to 9% higher than the adoption rates for other opt-in programs in that organization. So this was very encouraging. And we were also encouraged by the fact that this rate has not dropped uh, even after more than 4 months of the program having been rolled out.
Okay.
Besides this, the overall learner satisfaction rate was also significantly higher than the organization average satisfaction index for any such kind of project management training programs. So overall, we were also very happy, and our stakeholders were also very happy. And in fact, they were considering to roll out the other practical activities also as part of the learning paths that we created based on this as a pilot. So
Okay,
it was
great.
very encouraging for us. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've measured the engagement, the adoption, the opt-in of the adoption of the program. Did you also see other behavior changes? Have you gotten to that extent of measuring the impact of the learner?
Yes. So when we were talking with our stakeholder, what feedback we got from a couple of them when we were talking to our main client stakeholder was that people are actually interacting with each other, and there is a lot of peer interaction where people get together, have discussions, and uh, share their own ideas and experiences and what they have been doing and how things are working for them when they've been applying the approaches. So there is a lot of activity also. So things are changing. Approach and attitude uh, of this towards the subject matter is also eventually changing. But of course, this is going to take time. Is what we've understood overall. It's not something which will happen immediately in a few months, in 6 months. It's going to be a long process because it's a company-wide implementation of the approach.
And it's good that you're looking at it now, though, um, just to be able to report on it in the future and kind of see the evolution of how this approach impacts the overall learning initiative. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what your metrics are when we talk again next year about
Oh
this.
yes, that will be lovely. And in fact, we've also started, like I said, it was a twofold requirement. So we also developed the learning components for the client stakeholder as well.
All
So
right.
that has also kind of worked well for them.
Well, I just have one more question for you, and then I'm sure our listeners and viewers are interested in learning what's new or what are some of your critical initiatives for the remaining part of 2021. This has certainly been an unusual year still for everyone. Some countries are moving, out of the pandemic. We're kind of having a little bit of a reset here. So, I think it will be it's something that I'm interested in, and all of us are interested in learning, what are your key focuses or predictions for
Mhm.
next and for the remainder of this year?
Right. As an organization, DelphianLogic is really looking to implement human-centered design process on several projects in the coming years. However, taking this design transformation process ahead is quite challenging. It's mainly because of the lack of opportunities that we get on live projects, because several of our clients' requirements have critical time to market imperatives. And we really don't want to do this in a slapdash manner. So what we've decided is to perfect this initiative internally before we roll it out onto other projects, for example. So actually, DelphianLogic, the organization is currently going through a transformation as well. We are growing, restructuring, we are streamlining our processes. There's a lot of change happening, change management happening. So we're considering this as our sandbox. This is where we are trying out, we're improving, we are perfecting our human-centered design processes. And this is also one of our key focuses and my key focuses for 2020 and 2021 and 2022 as well. Actually, we are trying to work it out within the organization as an internal initiative before we can now start rolling it out to projects as well.
Well, fantastic. I wish you a lot of luck, Anjali, and your team. And thank you for joining me today and sharing about your experience and some of the examples here that you're doing. It's certainly exciting, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you and to collaborate and learn from you, as well as us sharing with you, our research and best practices. So again, it's been a great relationship. Thank you, and I wish you a lot of luck and good health, and be safe into the remaining part of our year.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here today.
And thank you everyone for listening in and watching us. Until next time, take care and be safe.
Thank you.